Hi, I'm Jerry Bowyer. Welcome to Meeting of Minds with Jerry Bowyer on Salem Podcast Network. My guest today, back for a second appearance, is Dr. Robert Plummer, who is the New Testament chair at Southern Baptist. And we talked previously about, now this is confusing, I guess it's chiastic. His most recent book about Greek is the Beginning Greek book. A year before that is the Intermediate Greek book. So he did Intermediate before Beginner, but you don't. That's not the order in which I think you should read them. So we talked at some length about his what was the title of the intro book?
Yeah, the intro is entitled Beginning with New Testament Greek. So if you kind of look at the cover way back, it looks like Beginning Greek.
Yes.
And then the second one is Going Deeper with New Testament Greek. So you got Beginning Greek and Deeper Greek. So they kind of have they could parallel sort of expression.
Well, yes, this is the sequel, Deeper Greek, which basically, would you characterize this as an intermediate New Testament Greek book?
Yes, it's an intermediate grammar that's especially geared towards the classroom, towards the student. So not a reference grammar that's made to just put on the shelf and look stuff up, but it's made to teach intermediate Greek. It's co-authored, I should mention, with Andreas Kostenberger and Ben Merkel.
And I would say that this is a book that is meant to be read. A lot of textbooks are not really readable. It's more like a lot of textbooks are almost like class notes. So you go to the class and it's the same material, but the textbook isn't readable. There isn't a lot of prose in textbooks typically. There's just more like bullet points. This actually is written in a kind of a conversational style. So this has been on my bed table. This has been my nighttime reading. I'm not saying your writing puts me to sleep, Dr. Plummer.
I was wondering about that.
I do sleep after, but it doesn't put me to sleep. That's just the circadian rhythm that's responsible for that. And by the way, there's also a laminate summary.
Laminated charts, that's right, that summarize the textbook. And recently, these have been only $6.99 on Amazon, which is a really good price.
It is.
And the Beginning Greek also, I should mention, has a set of laminated charts with it. Now, both for your viewers, both grammars have lots of free stuff that anyone can access. If you go to the website beginninggreek.com for this one, beginninggreek.com, and for this one, deepergreek.com. Now, I will note, I don't think you can get the first edition anymore, but there's one that has revised edition on it here. Some corrections and changes and updates. But Jerry, just keep what you got. You're good.
Because I don't have the revised.
You don't have the revised edition. But I'll send you one. If you I'll get your address after. I'll make sure you get a free revised edition.
Well, you've already sent me this. I feel like I'm already too much.
Yeah, the Daily Dose mug. Well, you need a book too, so we'll send you one. B&H will send it to you. I'll ask them to. It's fine.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But your viewers, if they look at deepergreek.com, they'll see some of the distinctives of the textbook and lots of free stuff too, like PowerPoint presentations for each chapter you can download for free. Vocabulary flashcards are free, all that stuff.
So I don't think that people understand how doable this is. So your Beginning Greek, or Beginning with New Testament Greek, that book, so I was able to read through that a little bit each evening. And then Sunday afternoons, I went to the website, and you can also get to all of it through Daily Dose of Greek. That links to everything, and just went through the PowerPoints and went through the videos. You have videos for each of these. And that's Sunday afternoons. I think that was maybe a little less than a year to get through that. And then maybe another 6 months of going deeper in the same thing. So a year and a half to 2 years. And I'm a really busy person. And I was able to do that. And it's not like I'm a super quick learner. It's just, you just put in that time. So this is very doable. And I think people, maybe because it's a slightly different alphabet or whatever, or because they didn't do well in high school Spanish, or people just don't think they're smart enough. But every Greek child learned Greek.
Yeah, that's
Even
right.
Even the dumb kids learned Greek.
That's a good point.
So this is doable.
Yes, I think it is 100% doable and very rewarding, as you've discovered yourself, how enjoyable it is to be able to read the Bible in the original language. I mean, and it's something that literally thousands of people around the world, whether through this grammar or other grammars, are learning to do this. People who are retired, people who are middle of their life, people who are students, people in elementary school. Yes, you totally can do it. And it's very rewarding. As you mentioned, there's all kinds of free instructional videos. And I'll mention, we added something very recently on there. I was going to grab it off here, but it's a PDF. If you go to beginninggreek.com and you go to the student downloads, it's the last thing that was added underneath there. It's a little workbook of translation. And Greg Wolf put this together. He's a friend of mine. After you study this book, you'll know about 330 vocabulary words. So he's a computer guy. He said, give me all the verses in the New Testament that only use those words and nothing else. And so it has 611 verses. I mean, it's a nice little booklet, and you won't run into a single vocabulary word that you haven't learned. Now, there are plenty of other verses that have a few words that you haven't learned as well. But that's a free little workbook, a reading book that people can joyfully apply the knowledge that they've learned. So.
The other thing they can do is they can go to Daily Dose of Greek and work their way through John's Gospel now. Or you can go to the archive and work your way through Mark's Gospel, for example. Those who are lectionary people, I know you Baptists, what is that lecture? I don't know what that is. I know you, of course you know what it is, but a lot of Baptists don't use it, but Episcopalians and Lutherans and Roman Catholics have the lectionary. That just finished Mark. Right. So, and now we're entering into the year of Luke. I don't think you have Luke, but you have Mark and you have John, right?
We have, well, we're halfway through. We're going through John right now. So people, if they go to dailydoseofgreek.com, and that's geared a little bit more, the daily videos, towards people who have some knowledge of Greek already. Although like you mentioned, there's basic instructional videos on there too.
Right.
Sending out a daily 2 to 3 minute screencast. We're writing on the text. They can hear my voice as they see me mark up the text. And we also have those on apps, on the Apple, the iOS app, the Android app. And that's a really efficient way to look at the archives or find previous videos. But we have on the archives all of the Gospel of Mark, all of the book of Revelation, all of 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, all the book of Philemon. So we have, I mean, literally, I think about 2,000 free downloadable videos.
I didn't see that you had Revelation.
The whole book of Revelation.
Wow.
Yeah.
I got to check that out.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's well worth it. At least I'll understand the grammar.
Revelation, the grammar is not very hard, really. I mean, there's some unusual dimensions to it, but the vocabulary and syntax are not that difficult. There's the biggest problem with Revelation for students is some rare vocabulary, like for the word for frog and rainbow and dragon. They don't know some of this rare, or all the stones and the, New Jerusalem. It's just, you never run into those. And then actually the grammatical irregularities, students usually don't really notice them, but there are a few grammatical irregular, like in other words, there won't be a agreement between a participle and the noun that it's describing, and commentaries debate why this is and so on. But most beginning students really don't notice. So
I see. Well, speaking of, participles not agreeing in number, etc., a lot of that material is covered in the intermediate Greek, the going deeper with New Testament Greek. Yeah. So basically, you start off with textual criticism, which is great. I'm really hoping for just that. My appetite was whetted on that. So I don't know if that's on the agenda, but
yeah. Well, I'm looking to see if I can see a book I'm going to recommend to you back here. I might not be able to grab it real fast, but Dirk Jonkind, Jongkind, Dirk Jonkind. He is at Tyndale House, Cambridge, and he just came out with a little paperback recently about text criticism and the text of the New Testament. That'd be a great book to read.
Yeah, and I just find it's tough to read the apparati, the CNTS or the Tischendorf. It's like a highly specialized language. I don't know the language of like the symbolic language of that sort of thing.
Yes, we've done a few videos. I've had especially some guest people who are really into text criticism. So if you go into the Daily Dose website, dailydoseofgreek.com, and you go up in the search bar, if you type in textual apparatus or UBS 5, Nestle Alant, search some of those, especially textual apparatus. You'll pull up some instructional videos that teach you how to read that.
And you've got some principles here in terms of resolving textual criticisms. I think you have kind of an answer to the King James only, that kind of dogma, respectful, but still an answer, and kind of explain sort of the state of things now, which is not this text is right versus that text is right, but being able to see kind of why in some cases some textual tradition might have something right but have something else wrong, and be able to sort of try to recreate the probable original text.
There's no like as you're speaking about it, I agree with everything you said. There's no like secret Vatican archives of changed manuscripts, all these sensationalist things we hear in the media or in movies. In fact, anyone with a modern Bible has an ESV, NIV, New Living Translation. Down at the bottom of the page, it's every 2 or 3 pages, it's going to have a little footnote. It's going to say some manuscripts read this, Dead Sea Scrolls reads this, and all text criticism is exploring those issues, why there are variants in ancient manuscripts, and how we could be confident what the original writing of the author read.
Would you agree with this statement that to the general public, the general public, to the degree that it's thinking about this question, vastly overstates the degree to which the process of copying distorts the meaning or makes us unable to understand what the original text was?
Yes.
In other words, there's this kind of sense, well, that's so long ago that we couldn't possibly know anything because it's been copied so many times over and over again, that is an oversold story.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if people want to go on YouTube and search for Peter Williams, he's at Tyndale House, Cambridge. He's done some nice talks about the reliability of text transmission. Or Dan Wallace frequently speaks on this in churches. He's an expert on text criticism. So it's one of those things where you actually, when you begin to actually look at the evidence for the manuscripts, how early they are, what are these variants we're talking about? Sometimes students, when they haven't thought about this, they're like, oh, what are all these? And say, oh, well, is there a sigma in this word, this, or is there not? Or,
the variants are basically spelling variations overwhelmingly, right?
Usually extremely minor things. Is there a conjunction dead there or not? Is the article there? Is this a third singular verb or a third plural? And you can see, like, on one of the standard critical texts, the United Bible Society 5th edition, listing all significant variants, you might have 1 or 2 per page, and they're mostly the kinds of things that we're talking about, like this,
Right. Yeah. There's a few big items like the woman taken in adultery, or the end of Mark. But and
those are the 2 big ones.
Those are the 2 big ones. And there's I don't see any doctrine. Oh, I was just listening to your Mark because I was preaching through Mark because of the lectionary, and thus he made all foods clean. Well, if we have an Omicron versus an Omega, then we might have a neuter versus a masculine. Therefore, it might be thus foods are purged, or thus he made all foods clean. The text, I think, favors the masculine, right? But is there really a doctrine in place? Because later on, it's clear that all foods are clean, at least by Acts 10. But whether it happened in Mark 10 or Acts 10, so there's not some textual variant that's going to like destroy the doctrine of the Trinity or something like that.
Yes. Yeah, you're correct. The variants usually are not doctrinally significant, usually, right? And even the ones that you might say, well, this could be somewhat doctrinally significant in terms of, is it asserting this truth or this truth? There's a multiplicity of texts that make clear the unified voice of Scripture on these issues. So even if you're like, well, I don't know if this verse is this verse clearly asserting the deity of Jesus or not. Well, there are other verses that clearly are.
Right.
Yeah, it's something that, again, most people, they just kind of have absorbed some skepticism from radio shows or from TV or movies. And if it's something you really look into, it can actually strengthen your faith. The thousands, literally over 5,000 manuscripts or portions of manuscripts that have been preserved dating back to the early 2nd century. So the early 100s, just astounding. What we have compared to any other ancient piece of literature, just talking about the New Testament.
Yeah, we've got some very early P's, P for papyrus. We've got early 2nd century.
Yeah.
We've got, people who knew John. We've got, that quickly.
Yeah.
And I think a point that some other people have made is, look, this isn't like you buy a book and throw it out after 2 years. This is vellum or whatever. So a copy of a copy might be a copy, and then that copy's around for 300 years, 200 or 300 years. Then you make another copy. So it's more long lasting. I'm sorry, you were going to say something.
No, and with the digital technology and the internet, all of these ancient manuscripts can be viewed. There's nothing, again, it's no secret Vatican archive. You go to Center for Study of New Testament Manuscripts.org, csntm.org. Go in there. You can look at P46, pull up high quality, go to codexvaticanus.org. You can, or codexsinaiticus.org, Vaticanus website, slightly different. You can go type in, I want to go to John 1:1.
So Sinaiticus, that's the Tischendorf one, right?
Sinaiticus is the Tischendorf, yeah.
Right.
And it's all been scanned in and like queued. You can go exactly to the verse you want, blow it up. It'll give you the English to the side even. It's amazing. And that's from the early 300s. Just astounding. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
And what's shocking is to see how similar different textual traditions are. I mean, people are careful about this.
Yeah, I think most students would read through, let's say we had Codex Sinaiticus written down in modern Greek font, like students are used to reading. They would rarely note, even though there'd be some minor differences, rarely would anyone notice them. The main thing they might notice is where the divine name is written with the first and last letter and the 2 lines over it. You have like, if you have Theos, right, or you have Jesus, you'll have the first and the last letter with a little line over the top. That's not a system that's followed in our modern Greek New Testaments, but was frequently followed in ancient texts.
So is that a Hebraism, or is that you mentioned God so much that we're going to use the abbreviation?
Yeah, I think it's no one ever told us so no one ever said why they were doing it. Michael Kruger, who's a president of Reformed Theological Seminary, has written some about this in his book on canon, and he's argued that it shows a very early canonical impulse, and that the authors are doing this in works that they view as distinct from other works. It's a way of saying this is a unique, inspired work. And so, and usually,
so it's not followed in the apocryphal writings, is that right? Or it's not followed in the Gnostic writings? Is that the idea?
I would have to check on that, but I think so. I think so. It's certainly not followed just in like regular apostolic fathers' writings, right? And I know it's followed in the New Testament writings. It's not always like you think. You think they're doing Jesus, they're doing the word Spirit, they're doing the word like, oh, is it only God? But then every now and then they'll do words that seem not as theologically significant, like anthropos, and sometimes it seems kind of random. I'm not it's called the nomina sacra, the procedure, right? The sacred name, but it's not always done for God or for His name. So I'm going to defer to Kruger on that. Michael Kruger and his in his recent books on canon.
So when you say anthropos, it's not huia.
No, it's not always a reference to Jesus as the Son of Man.
Son of Man. Okay.
It might just have an alpha and a sigma but it's it does seem you're like, well, maybe they're just saving space. These are words that occur all the time.
Right.
But yeah,
you think there's more.
You don't find it in, Ignatius or something, Irenaeus or things like that. It's seems like it's unique to scripture, or at least I'm not sure on the Apocrypha. At least it's by documents that are revered as unique and distinct in some way. But I think from Kruger, I'd have to check. I think he's arguing canon, obviously, which would only be Old and New Testament. Yeah.
Which helps shed light on the canonical question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So even pre-canonical explicit discussion, or, just sort of random comments, less organized, just it shows this canonical impulse and this implicit canon.
So as I was reading, going deeper with New Testament Greek, I felt like this is the book that tells you all the things that in intro we said we can't get into this now, or all of the things where you learned a general rule, but not the exceptions to the rule. And maybe even something like, oh, there's a deeper rule that shows that even the variations, this is where you start to learn it's not irregular. It's just it's actually that this verb form or whatever is actually consistent with a more universal grammatical principle that isn't, you're not ready for it with luo, lues, lue, but that there's actually a reason for these things that seem irregular, a kind of a, to use Aslan, kind of the deeper magic, the deeper laws of grammar, where you can start to now understand the irregularities are just another kind of regularity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. I agree with you in that I tell students every now and then, I have a student for whatever reason, maybe their Greek is not required in their MA program and they're taking Greek. They say, well, I'm going to quit after this. It's great, but I'm going to just go. I usually say, please take Greek syntax, because you're a little bit dangerous right now. Like you think you understand the genitive. You say of plus. I said, but there's a lot of nuances of the genitive. The genitive can express time. The genitive can express like price, content. It can express, the object of a verbal idea. We need it. Intermediate Greek is new, as you noted, nuancing out. You have a simple understanding, and then it's kind of filling out the potential nuances of that and patterns that were a little too complicated to explain in beginning Greek. Yeah.
Speaking of dangerous, so when you see things gone wrong, when pastors, they might take 1 year of Greek, and then they get out and they start preaching, and now I know Greek. You don't. What do you see as the pitfalls, the most common mistakes? Please don't mention any of the things that I do. The most common mistakes where they kind of, practice Greek without a license and end up, maybe potentially doing some harm.
Well, one of the common, and I try to be very charitable in this, like I don't go around trying to point out people's mistakes or things like that. That's not my. And I do tell my students, generally, this is a general rule, which I sometimes break myself. I tell them that Greek should be like underwear. It should provide support, but not be visible, right? So, I'm not a big fan of, people going up in the pulpit and giving a lot of Greek, but I want it to undergird. I want it to inform what they're saying and be the foundation for it. I do think probably some of the most common mistakes relate to word studies, like the etymological fallacy, where people try to take what the word meant hundreds of years prior and read that into the current usage. Maybe they read it in a poor resource and they just kind of repeating it.
Maybe would logos be an example of that? I have seen people build gigantic philosophical and theological systems, basically saying, well, John is, here's how Plato used logos.
Yeah. Well, that's a fair, because all words, so maybe that could be part of it, depending on how they're going with it, or that could be the word study fallacy too. what's called the illegitimate totality transfer. So what we're saying there is word, like the word logos, can mean many different things. It can mean like word, a singular communication, word like a discourse unit. It can also be used for an account, like settling an account with someone where they owe money. It can be used in philosophical literature, as you've noted, about sort of this principle, like logical over organizing principle. And so, but whether it's logos or something else, sometimes people will take all those definitions and assume like all of those are present in each use of the word, right?
Yes.
Illegitimate totality transfer, illegitimately taking the totality of what a word could mean and thinking that each instance contains that totality. And so that can result in, as you're noting, some really deep, some tangents of thought. Now, John 1:1, I think it's a fair question. You say, what is the most natural way that John intended us to understand the word logos here? And it's hard to not look first at the Old Testament. By the word of the Lord, the heavens were made. Like it's clear that that's the most immediate background, but it's also clear that he is writing in Greek and he expects there to be some probably some level of his language, is very universal in the sense of understandable to a wide audience, light and darkness. And he's choosing Jesus' teaching and describe him in such a way that it is broadly accessible. But yeah, I think word studies are probably one of the most common. I think
one of the things that might be going on there is, I think from several generations of pastors, theologians, they would be trained in classical Greek and then go to the New Testament. They didn't cut their teeth on the Septuagint. They cut their teeth on the Socratic dialogues, for example. So there would be a strong tendency to read the semantic range of classical Greek. Start with that rather than the semantic range of the Septuagint, which would probably be most relevant to a New Testament writer.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's potential. That's true. If someone is reading the meaning of words in their classical context from hundreds of years prior, rather than the Koine literature itself, which we know from the papyri or from other writings, especially the Septuagint is the most important one.
Right.
Then that could result in distortion. I'll give another example, please. And I don't want to offend you or any of your viewers, but one that's so many pastors have used, right? John 20:21, John 21, where do you love me? Do you love me? And people make a big deal out of the variation between agapao and phileo. Mm-hmm. However, if you read John's gospel in Greek, he loves to use near synonyms all over the place for so many different things.
It's part of his idiolect.
It is. It's how he writes. And even in the passage in John 21, it says, Peter was sad. He doesn't say Peter was sad because he used this Greek verb. He says Peter was sad because Jesus asked him a third time.
Yes.
It says
why he was sad, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it was the repetition.
Also, was Jesus speaking Greek when he was talking to Peter? I mean, it's possible.
Probably not.
But Aramaic would have been the more natural. Right.
Yeah. Probably speaking Aramaic.
Right.
And if theoretically, let's say there were two different words for love in Aramaic, and we didn't have all the literary context, and then you can say, well, is John conveying some new, but again, John's style, everything else, it seems to say this is just stylistic variation, like he does throughout his whole book. And he's already done that with agapao and phileo. The father phileo is the son, the father agapao is the son. It's the same meaning. So yeah, that's a case where, again, a sort of a simplistic understanding. Maybe they probably heard a reputable preacher, someone they loved and respected, who's worthy of love and respect, use that. And so then it's kind of repeated by other people.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, with these reputable preachers, they have other guardrails in place. Yeah. So they might exaggerate a Greek linguistic point, but they're not going to crash because of that.
I would say it's just, unfortunately, it's just a distraction from what could have been a more focused and faithful sermon. So, people say, well, Jesus is saying this now. Well, that, okay, you're just kind of wandering off from the real focus of the text at that point. In the end, your sermon could have been more focused. It could have been stronger, but it's not like you're teaching heresy or something like that.
Right. And by the way, kind of our patron saint around here, C.S. Lewis, maybe has contributed a bit to this with The Four Loves, which is a wonderful kind of philosophical book, but might be overreading the semantic range differences between agape, philos, philo.
Conceptually, he's totally right. There's a difference between romantic love and friendship and erotic love, certainly. But the root question for the New Testament is a different question, right? Does phileo and agapao, what are their semantic ranges as used by this author or something like that? So,
I think something that's helped me more than anything else with what you've done with these books and the Daily Dose of Greek is not so much the Greek that I've learned, because I'm still really a beginner in many ways. It is that by making me read the Greek, you've slowed me down. And by slowing me down, you've made me pay closer attention to the text than I would normally have done with English, which I can't skim Greek, but I can skim English. And so tiny little textual things. There was one of them in Mark. Now, actually, I'd already paid a lot of attention to this, and I've stuff in my book about it. But when Jesus is talking to the rich young ruler and he lists the 10 Commandments, and he says, "Do not defraud," aphostereo, I believe. You talk about this and you stop and say, well, wait a minute, that's not in the 10 Commandments, right? And you speculate a little bit about why that is, and I'd have a similar view than yours. But it makes someone stop and think about it, as does looking at the textual material, because that's not in all the texts. So slowing us down makes us read more carefully, because I think that most of us feel like we're more familiar with the New Testament than we actually are, and are therefore overconfident in our ability to get to the main point, as opposed to being changed by the text. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, amen. I agree with you. I mean, Psalm 1, we need to be like trees planted by streams of water. We need you just soaking in that word slowly, and reading it in the original language hopefully does cause us to meditate, to carry it with us, to think about it more carefully. And the Spirit, then we pray, takes that knowledge and meditation and presses it into our souls and our minds, our hearts, makes us value what God values and hate the things that he hates. So yeah, I'm glad that reading the Greek New Testament has been that spiritually nourishing experience for you.
And sometimes you're not sure, like again, Mark 10, washing hands from the marketplace, baptizing with fists. Okay. Something going on there? I'm not sure. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but I'm going to stop and think about that. Now, then just how it happens around then, I was reading Rabbi Daniel Boyarin, who is suggesting that there's actually something live going on here, that there is a pugnacious element to the party that is rebuking Jesus and the disciples for not washing. But I wouldn't even think about that. I don't have a firm conclusion on it, right? You suggest it, and then maybe not. We'll see. But so it's hard to know sometimes which things are live metaphors and like hypocrites, right? That's a mask wearer, literally under critic. So does Jesus mean that, or is it by then a dead metaphor? I don't know, but I wouldn't even know to think about it unless the Greek made me slow down and think about it.
Yeah. And to most of the students I'm teaching are going to be ministers, pastors, missionaries, biblical counselors. And for them to use the best resources, the best commentaries, the most careful and technical commentaries, those commentaries are engaging with the original language. So they can't even really follow the conversation, the debate, the discussion, weigh the evidence, unless they can, to some degree, have a usable knowledge of the biblical languages. So
that's a great point. Other than popular commentaries, you can't read them unless you can at least sound out the letters or have some knowledge of this. All right. So Daily Dose of Greek just hit 3 million views this
We
year, didn't it?
did over the last, my webmaster told me over the last 365 days, whenever he was counting that, we hit 3 million total video views, which is maybe how many Beyonce gets in 30 minutes, but for us, we're like, yay. We're excited and watched in over 100 countries, which we're really excited to provide that instruction free around the world.
And you've recently, you do Daily Dose of Hebrew.
We have Daily Dose of Greek. Yeah, Daily Dose of Hebrew.
Latin.
Daily Dose of Aramaic.
And Aramaic the new one. Latin's what, about 2 years, maybe?
Yeah, Daily Dose of Latin. And then we also have a Spanish Daily Dose of Greek, a Spanish Daily Dose of Hebrew, a Korean Daily Dose of Greek, and we're getting ready to roll out Portuguese, Greek, and Hebrew, and hopefully Chinese Greek. So that's my next vision is to help scholars within these major language groups, give them the resources, tools, training, so that they're able to provide this sort of ongoing accountability to native speakers in their own country.
And again, you just launched Daily Dose of Aramaic, so that was maybe like 2 months ago. So they're basic videos. For your viewers, if they don't know, there's some portions of the Old Testament, a few small portions that are in Aramaic, especially in the book of Daniel, Ezra. And so it's a closely related language to Hebrew, but it is a different language, or it's, I guess, it's like the similarity of Portuguese and Spanish, maybe. And Scott Callahan, who just published an Aramaic grammar in English and an Aramaic grammar in Chinese joint, he published both of these. He's provided free lessons, and then he's going to do a video for every Aramaic verse in the Old Testament. Wow. Amazing.
All free.
So you can learn the language that Jesus spoke.
Yes.
That's now available, and it's all free. All right. Rob Plummer from Daily Dose of Greek and Going Deeper with Greek, and so many other resources, the Faith and Work Project, etc. Anything you want to leave us with? You've been very generous with your time. Anything that we didn't cover that you think?
Oh, you're very kind. Across? I would just encourage your listeners, if they have any inclination, even a little hint of like, I'd like to learn, whether it's Greek or Hebrew, just go to the website, dailydoseofgreek.com or Daily Dose of Hebrew, and just go to the beginning lessons and learn the alphabet, or just put your foot in there for 5 or 10 minutes. And you never know, a year or two from now, you could be reading some significant sections of the Old Testament in Hebrew or New Testament in Greek. It's a lot of fun. It's never been easier in the history of the world.
Never has.
In your own home to learn this. So now's your time.
If the average American Christian took a tenth of their binge watching away from whatever the favorite binge is, a tithe of your binge, you would be reading Greek and Hebrew in the original text in 2 years.
Absolutely. That's completely true. Yes. And if they took all the time they spent watching Netflix and Apple TV and so on, in 2 or 3 years, they might be a Greek or Hebrew scholar.
Yes. And one other point here, I'm reminded that something happened just a few days ago. I'm here in my son Jeremy's office, and his son, Arthur, spends time with us, and we do, my wife and I do Greek and Hebrew together. So the other day he was sitting over there in the other part of the office, and I was singing Aleph, Beit, and Gimel, Dalet, and he's just singing along quietly with me. I didn't know he had picked it up. Little 3-year-old boy. I didn't even know, and everyone in the office is just staring at this little boy as he's churning out the Hebrew alphabet. Now, didn't take effort. He was just around it. So if you're going to do this, if you're in your home and you're listening to these videos, it's going to pour out. And people are going to look and say, maybe I can learn it too. And there's going to be some osmosis. You're going to be a little center of biblical. What is that? My pastor told me about this, Little Gidding. Have you heard of the village of Little Gidding? It's a Christian community, bombed in World War II, tragically. Christian community, peasant community. They all learned Greek and Hebrew to study the Word of God together. Let Daily Dose of Greek and Hebrew make the whole world a little Gidding. It can be done.
That's inspiring. Thank you.
Amen. All right. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Plummer. Really appreciate it.
It's a joy. Thank you.